Welcome everyone to the 2018 Mario and Alma Pastega Family Awards ceremony. And I'm Steve Shack, Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, and I'm delighted to serve as your host for today's program. This represents the 40th year for awarding Pastega Scholarship, Excellence in Scholarship, and the 33rd year for awarding the Excellence in Teaching Award. Over the years, the Pastega name has become a very organic part of the WOU lexicon, and whenever one mentions Pastega, we think of rooms in the Woodcock building and of these awards, but we think of excellence. And the saying that is in the Pastega room, the Woodcock Center, definitely is a testament to the Pastega philosophy and why we recognize the faculty that we do. Over the years, again, this name has been associated with this, and we take great pride in celebrating this, and indeed is why President Fuller is here today, the deans are here today, because we do recognize the role that our faculty play in excellence. We place a lot of emphasis on recognizing this because of not only the personal accomplishment that a recognition like this symbolizes to the individuals, but it also, we know that there is the trickle-down aspect or the pass-it-forward aspect, that the engagement that faculty, such as the two faculty we're recognizing today, the impact that they have daily on student lives here at the university, and know that that legacy continues to spread across the state and the nation. So we come here today to celebrate two of our colleagues, Marie and Peter, in recognition of the work that they have done as members of the faculty here, and especially in areas of teaching and scholarship. I'm going to ask the respective division chairs to introduce our speakers, and then after, you notice how effective Mark Henkels is at doing this. He's done it a few times, but I will also ask for the award winner's dean to come up also, and after the division chair's introduction, we'll have a presentation, a certificate, and a little envelope, and a photo opportunity. So with that, I would like to invite Dr. Mark Henkels, chair of the Social Science Division, to introduce our first speaker.
Peter Callero wins another award. I'll tell you, I was trying to do a little research on this, and he was hired so long ago, there's really no evidence of exactly when he got here. But from what I could tell, way back in the mists of time, maybe during the Reagan era, a scholar emerged on campus, and he was a Jesuit-trained scholar. And he came wearing Bucky Badger stuff for his PhD program. And he brought to us a desire to create a sociology program, which had never existed on campus before. We have ever since then had a sociology program, and it has thrived. But I have to say, it didn't thrive just because of him, because you got to give a shout out to Dean Bray, Maureen Dolden. They also have won the same award for excellence in teaching. And that makes you think, well, what is it about their teaching that makes it so great? And I lived across the hallway from Peter for 20 years at least, I'd say. And I can tell you three things I saw. One thing, quality. They set out and said, we want to have our students know theory. We want our students to know empirical research and statistics to the level that they could go to any graduate school in the country from Western and thrive. And they never varied from that. Their theses are some of the best and most interesting theses, and they lost a lot of students as majors who became social science sociology majors, and a little bit of avoidance of those standards. And yet they still every year produced just great students, and their students have really gone out and made a mark in academia and in services. And the second thing is, and I think this is actually the most important thing, is he didn't educate people just to have them go places. whether it's professional or graduate school or whatever. He educated people to change the world. Honest to God, that's what it's about in that program. That program is about telling people the world's not good. The world could be a lot better, and the instrument of change is you. He's a regular Saul Alinsky, I tell you. And he empowers people. You look at the Monmouth Independence Tenant Union, you look at these other things, you realize it's not just thoughts, it's not just statistics, it's action that also matters. And he makes the individuals think they can make that difference. And that's the third thing that I observed over the years. When he talks to students, by the time they get to be his seniors, he knows their backgrounds pretty thoroughly. He knows their strengths, their weaknesses, their interests, and their concerns. And he gets them to believe that all those things have made them uniquely powerful, uniquely influential, and that they have their own purpose in life that they should go out and fulfill. And he empowers them. I don't know if I have anything else to say, except when I have even after, I've been here a pretty long time myself, 30 years, and I still come across students and I go, that's an interesting case. And I still come across classes that just don't work right. Well, I got a go-to guy, Peter Callero. So I bring to you Peter Callero, Mayor Pastega, Excellence in Teaching Award winner.
Mark, where'd Mark go? Thank you. That was really nice of you. Thank you also to the Pastega family for the generous gift of this scholarship money to the university. But I have to say, accepting this award, I have a little bit of kind of mixed feelings. And the reason is that I have this lesson where I talk to my students about the culture of individualism. And I say that when we recognize individuals with awards and we give them plaques and money, we raise them up, and at the same time, we are unintentionally diminishing the cooperative nature of achievement. So everything any one of us achieves is really a cooperative, collective effort. And so teaching, of course, is no exception at all to that. In fact, my teaching is really the Department of Sociology. So Dean and Maureen, I'm so glad that Mark mentioned that, are just as part of everything that I do every day. And God, we've been together for sometimes too many years, I think. And so it's important for us, I think, to recognize that. Also, I don't want to really talk about my teaching today. I want to talk about not my students, our students. And I want to talk about their achievements. And I'm going to do that with two stories. And this first story takes place in a prison. Oregon State Penitentiary, the maximum security prison for men in Salem. And this story begins back in the late 80s, early 90s. When I first arrived here, we had a program at Western where we taught classes inside the penitentiary. The inmates could actually get degrees. We don't have that anymore. And faculty could volunteer their time to teach a few classes a year, and I was part of that program. The state pen was close to my house where we lived at the time, and so when I would get done teaching classes on campus, on my way home, I could stop by in the afternoon, couple afternoons, and teach a class. Well, it was one spring day, very warm out, I remember it. I had a midterm scheduled for my class there in the prison. I was feeling a little cranky. I was hot. I was tired. I wasn't looking forward to going inside, waiting the half hour sometimes it took to go through all the checkpoints, going up to the third floor in the corner where the classroom was. Actually, I think this picture, that might actually be the classroom there in that corner there. It looked out onto the yard. We had about 15 or 20 students. Excellent students, by the way. Never missed a class. They always well prepared, but they were also very eager to learn. And so I get up there and I walk into the classroom. It was a very tiny room that just barely fitting the 15 or 20 of us in there. Stuffy, smelled like men, sweating. It wasn't very comfortable. And there was a small window that looked out into the recreation yard out here. And then there was a back wall with a larger window where the correctional officers stood guard. So anyway, I get into this classroom that day, and nobody's talking. Usually they're talking. I figured they'd just be nervous about the midterm. So I go in front, open my bag, take the exams out, start distributing them as usual. Still nobody's talking. Then I sit down at the little desk in front, and a student sitting in the back raises his hand. And I knew all the students pretty well. This student especially well. I'm going to call him Jack. That's not his real name. Jack was the strongest, most respected inmate, not in my class, but in that institution. In fact, he had won a heavyweight boxing tournament there. He was in for some violent crimes. He'd spent most of his life on the inside. And he was brilliant. He was an excellent student, had this photographic memory. He was an amazing person in that way, too. Anyway, Jack raises his hand. And I said, "Yes, Jack," in a sarcastic way. And he says, "May we start?" And I said, "Yes, of course you can start. Begin." So Jack sits back down, writes his name on his exam, stands up, and starts walking towards me. And I didn't know what was going on. And then and I could see that other students started following Jack. Now all of these inmates are walking towards me with their blank exams. And so I was confused. At first I started to laugh. I said, "Oh, that's funny." They started putting the exams down and then walking out of the classroom. I was laughing. I was joking with them. "Sit down, come on, joke's over." They didn't stop. Then I started to get angry. I said, in my mind, you're violating the protocol of the classroom. I said, "Sit back." My dad mode kind of clicked in. He said, "Sit back down here. I'm going to flunk you all." They were ignoring me. And then I made a critical mistake. I grabbed one of them by the arm. It was a big arm, and then I let go. And they still kept walking and ignored me. And then I kind of stumbled back, I remember that, and sat down, disoriented, not knowing what was going on, confused. And then I remembered, I thought, could this be a riot? Was this some kind of signal for some kind of insurrection on the inside? And then I realized at the training before going to teach in the prison, I had signed a waiver that said that in case there is a situation like this and I'm taken hostage, they would not negotiate for my release. And I thought, I'm going to die in here. This is how it's going to end. And then I looked out that window, and I thought, I'm going to need some security help. So I looked out that window where the guard was, and the students were talking to the guard, and they were all kind of joking around and laughing and pointing at me. And then eventually they all came in, Jack first, of course. They all followed Jack, and they sat back down, and then Jack handed me a piece of paper with a note on it, already written, and this is what it said. Dear Professor Callero, on the first day of class, you explained to us that you would be grading on the curve and that the student with the highest point total would receive an A. We asked you if everyone would get an A, even if we all had a score of 0. You laughed and said yes, but that it would never happen because students are too competitive. You also said that students would never have enough trust in each other to make such a plan succeed. We have just demonstrated to you that we are not like your other students. We did not intend to offend or anger you. This was about education. We are now prepared to complete the exam. Thank you for your commitment to our education. And that note was signed by every student in the class. Yeah. That was a moment when the teacher became a student. And it taught me an important lesson. Don't underestimate the collective power of our students. And it motivated me to initiate a new curriculum back on campus. And it took me a few years, but I eventually did put together a series of courses on community organizing. I thought to myself, how can I take that power that I witnessed with my students on the inside and get my students on the outside to take that same motivation and energy that I knew they have and put it to work in the community. So the idea was to have in the fall a course on community organizing where the students would learn about Saul Alinsky, learn about the history of community organizing, learn about strategies and tactics, and then the last couple of weeks in the fall, do some kind of group project. Students that completed that course would then be eligible to take a follow-up course in the winter in which they would just be involved in organizing and setting goals and engaging the community in some kind of project. An even smaller group would then be eligible to serve as independent study or intern students to continue that project with the idea that they could then hand off whatever project they started to the next cohort the following year. So that first year, back in 1998, it was, the students decided that they wanted to work on a project that dealt with the problems of rental housing in the Monmouth Independence area. They were very frustrated with the conditions of housing, and so they decided to set up an organization that they called the Monmouth Independence Tenants Union. And the first year, what they did is they said, we're just going to focus on the most egregious problem that's the closest to home. And at that time, we had campus housing called campus estates. That's right where the current library is. These were a series of these little tiny dumps that the students lived in. They talked to the editors of the student newspaper and said, hey, look, we'd like to contribute to the newspaper a column each week. We're going to call Dump of the Week as a way to get the conditions kind of highlighted. So this is what was going on in campus estates at the time. And I just want to point your attention to the highlighted area, because this is important. It says that in the bathroom, the heat is provided by small, outdated wall heaters, and in the case of number 199, because of the proximity to the towel rack and inadequate safety levels of the outdated wall heaters, it has resulted in towels catching on fire. The students, this was not the only ones, and the students had gone to the administration and complained. They even set up a meeting with the president, and they were told that, yes, they realized there were problems, but eventually they're going to be torn down. They're not really worth investing in. Students were frustrated. They still feared for their safety. That was ended in the spring of that year. And then, some of you might remember, in the fall of the following year, disaster struck. And one of those estates that we had, those buildings that we had been complaining, that our students had been complaining about, burned to the ground. And one of our sociology students actually was lucky to escape with her life. I'm just going to make sure that you read this description here. This was the front cover of the Statesman Journal, Sunday edition. Eloina Cedillo doesn't know why she woke up at 2 a.m. that Sunday. She's just glad she did. I could see the red fire, the color of it, underneath the bed. That's when I got out, the 19-year-old Western Oregon University student said. Cedillo grabbed a fire extinguisher. It didn't work. As soon as I got back to the room, it went up in flames, she said. That's when the smoke alarm in the hallway finally went off. Cedillo and her 2 roommates, who weren't home at the time, lost all their belongings in the October 17th blaze. If I didn't get up, I wouldn't be here, she said. That's the thing that scares me. Scared all of us. But what it did do is it really motivated the students to continue their work. This article, which appeared in the Statesman Journal, was a month after the fire. Nothing ever reached the press about that fire. It was our students who took the information and that they learned in community organizing to put together a press release and alert the media about this problem, to shine some light on it. They were so effective that it was also picked up by the AP wire service, and I was getting calls from colleagues that I knew out of state that were reading this story. So that was the impetus, the real impetus, a baptism by fire, you might say, for the Monmouth Independence Tenants Union. So over the years, one cohort of students trained in the fall, smaller group working in the winter and spring, have been handing off the success of one group to the next over the years. Each group making small progress towards advancing the interest of tenants and tenant justice and housing safety in the Monmouth Independence area. They've done a lot of work. I can't summarize it. It's 20 years of work here. But I just want to give you a few examples of some of the success that some of you may not be aware of. So one of the things that they've done is that they engage in an annual education program in which they do canvassing in the different apartment complexes around the 2 cities. They also regularly do tabling at in this building here, and they've encouraged the city, that's what this news article is about, to put flyers in the utility bills so that tenants can get information about what their rights are. We knew that there was, and to this day is still the case, most tenants, especially tenants for the first time, young tenants, don't know what their rights are. They also have put together a web page which provides resources for tenants in the area to access so that they know where to contact people for need of help, particularly legal advice, what their rights are, how to report a violation. They were instrumental in pressuring the city to adopt a procedure for reporting violations. So initially there was no way, if you had a problem and you suspected that your landlord was breaking tenant law, how did you get that reported? They would go to the city, and the city would know what to do. And so they put together some forms, some violation forms, the rental unit violation form. And they pressured the city into adopting that form. It took a couple of years. Monmouth adopted it. And then years later, they were able to get the City of Independence to adopt this form. So these forms are now available in both English and Spanish and are used by both the City of Monmouth and Independence. But that wasn't enough. They also discovered that just reporting a violation will usually just stop there unless there's some kind of enforcement mechanism. And neither city had an enforcement mechanism or a set of procedures to enforce these violations. So they were able to get both cities to establish procedures and identify employees who would be responsible not only for reviewing the violations, but then going in and imposing fines on the landlords who were not adhering to landlord-tenant law. They also met resistance, and I love this quote. It's my favorite quote from the great abolitionist and former slave, Frederick Douglass. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And our students experience this. They continue to experience. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of where they received pushback. Early on, remember the dump of the week where they agreed to write a column? And it was, by the way, we got a lot of feedback. That was one of the highlights of the newspapers before media we have today, when people actually knew what a newspaper was. So the advertisers, the real estate advertisers, complained to the editors and complained to the university and saying, we're going to pull our advertising if you continue to run dump of the week. And we said, well, how about if we cut it back to dump of the month? And they, and they said no. And then so they told us, the editors eventually said, we need this advertising. Sorry, we're not going to let you do this anymore. So there was an important lesson about pushback on that. Another example, more recently, our students, a group of our students was doing the regular canvassing that they do in Independence, and they were at the Legacy Oaks apartment complex, a very large, relatively new complex. And they were approached by the manager who said, ordered them off the premises, off the grounds. And they said, for what basis? They said, well, no soliciting. And they said, we're not soliciting. We're providing information. We're educating tenants on their rights. And they said, no, we want you gone. And they said, no. Our students, they're very strong when they know their right. They're in the same way that our students at the penitentiary were very strong when they knew when they were right. Our students believed that they were right, so they didn't leave. The manager then called the Independence Police Department. The Independence police officers showed up and threatened our students with arrest. So at that point, they called me and said, what should we do? I said, I don't want you going to jail. So yes, please leave the grounds. We'll pick this up later. And we did. And we ended up in long negotiations we approached the city council and the city manager and then the owner of the apartment complex, and we were in negotiations over a period of time, and we reached this, in my view, an unsatisfactory compromise in which they would distribute the information, which they haven't been doing. It's a long story. We're looking at legislation right now. We've got some support with the Oregon Law Center, but that's a whole nother story. I won't go into that right now. The third example of pushback and resistance was when the negligent landlord threatened a lawsuit. And this was fairly early on. I've got a copy of the first and last page of this letter we received from the lawyer, in which they claimed that we made defamatory comments regarding my clients and the Windjammer apartments. The statements went so far as to imply that due to living conditions, the complex poses a fire and safety hazard. And that's absolutely the truth. This was the time one of the most egregious violators of landlord-tenant law, safety and health, Railings were falling over up on the second floor. There were holes in the floor of the apartments. We actually got, at the time, Paul Evans, some of you know Paul, former student, now state representative. At the time he was mayor, he was working with us and as we were organizing the tenants in this apartment complex. So he's named on the suit too. I threatened a countersuit for defamation because you'll notice that they have me under Department of Psychology up there. No offense to my colleagues in the psych department, but for a sociologist, that's going too far. So this was just a threat. It didn't go anywhere, you can imagine if you're a tenant and you complain and you get something like this and you don't have the support of an organization. Okay, so today they're continuing the work. Last year they have moved beyond the cities of Monmouth and Independence. They're working in coalition with other state groups. They were leading a rally at the state capitol last year for tenant rights, particularly on no-cause evictions. And also this dramatic increases in rents that we've seen in the neighborhood of 20 and 30% that are threatening a lot of tenants with homelessness. And this year, they've also we've got actually, May is here. May's one of the leaders. Raise your hand, May, so everybody can recognize you and the good work that you're doing. Are there any other Me Tooistas here right now? I don't see any. Yeah, Dahlia's over here too. Come over here, Dahlia, so everybody can see you. So they've been working with the Community Alliance of Tenants in Portland on the larger statewide issues. They're trying to develop that. They had a great event in Salem, in a neighborhood in West Salem earlier this year. So the fight goes on, and the education goes on also. So that's the end of my two stories. The last thing I want to talk about is the future. So if you work here at Western, you recognize this tagline from it's our new tagline, without, of course, the question mark and without that logo. So I have a couple of questions. What, or where, I should say, specifically are we going? Where's Western Oregon University going? And how are we going there? And I have a suggestion, small suggestion, that our destination is the good society. A more just, a more equal society. And how are we going to get there? Let's follow the lead of our students. And let's identify an immediate problem in our community. And imagine a coalition of faculty and students working together across multiple disciplines, year after year, on the same project, modeled by our students with the tenants union. And I think we could do something really special, and we could model something really special for other universities if we're able to accomplish that. And the good thing about that is that a measure of justice and solidarity and equality would be the ultimate assessment tool. Thank you very much.
I had it on good authority that Peter and Marie were going to provide us with a song and dance between the two presentations, so I'm not sure why Peter sat down. So many of you know Marie, probably most of you know Marie, through her activities with the university, serving on faculty senate, on the BABS working committee, on the bargaining team in her various faculty senate committees that she's worked on. You probably also know her through the undergraduate licensure program she coordinates, because so much of our coursework takes place in other divisions around campus. But maybe you're not as familiar with her work in the Division of Education and Leadership. So our division is very complex. We have 11 unique programs, and if my counting is correct, Marie has taught in 8 of them. She's coordinated 3 of them, and she's been heavily involved either in creating or in restructuring 5 of them. She is currently the interim director for our clinical practices and placements. So she supervises the placement of hundreds of pre-service teachers for their student teaching experiences. She hires and trains supervisors, and she finds solutions to myriad problems out in the schools. She also manages an S&S budget that's larger than my own. So any given day, you might find Marie teaching classes, observing students out in the schools, attending TSPC meetings that she loves, co-teaching a class at College Hill in Corvallis, attending an EdTPA conference, mentoring a master's student on a thesis, or reading to students in a K-12 classroom, possibly leading a book group there. You might find her out solving problems in Salem or Woodburn or Dallas or Corvallis schools, or collaborating with a graduate student on a professional presentation. You could find her teaching a boot camp about EdTPA, another favorite topic in our division, or attending a professional conference. You could find her participating on a book awards group or involved in any number of other activities in our division. But despite all of these activities, this does not form the core of Marie's professional life. What's central to Marie's professional life is books. For those of you who haven't visited Marie's office, you'll find that it is covered wall to wall with floor-to-ceiling bookcases. And those bookcases are filled with children's books and young adult books, possibly an occasional textbook, and maybe some adult literature. The books spill down off of the bookshelves into piles on the floors. And you might have to move a pile off a chair if you'd like to sit down. This doesn't even count the boxes of unpacked books that arrive regularly from awards committees that Marie will now have to read and, I apologize, get to read and evaluate in her work on book committees. Faculty disappear into Marie's office, and they emerge with carts full of books to use in their classes. They go in to browse the shelves to find the perfect book for a child or a grandchild. That's something I'm guilty of. Or perhaps the perfect book for an ailing student. They might need a book to support a lesson on diversity, or maybe some Spanish books for a bilingual classroom. Books are everywhere, but Marie can always put her finger right on the perfect one. When it became clear that one office couldn't contain all of Marie's books, we commissioned a gorgeous floor-to-ceiling locking bookcase that welcomes visitors into the Division of Education and Leadership. If you haven't seen it, you should come by for a visit, but you might have to step around a faculty member with a cart who's loading up a classroom set to teach a class. At the end of the year, Marie donates boxes of books to libraries with poorer school districts. She provides baskets of books for fundraisers. Maybe some of you won some books at the union's May Day festivities. She might ship books off to Africa, where a student or a graduating student is working in Peace Corps. She might leave her students with a book in hand when they graduate. Marie's passion for books is for books, but beyond that, she has a passion for sharing this love of books and reading with children and students, and for using books to help children understand diversity or science or illness or caring. It's about ensuring that all students are literate in a world that needs books more than ever. And it's about understanding how children and their teachers interact with books. Central to all of Marie's work is a solid research agenda that's grown to include colleagues and students, graduated students, and pre-service teachers. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Marie LeJeune to explain how she weaves all of these responsibilities together with her scholarship, to share some of her insights with us, and to take us on a journey into her world of books.
I want to start with a few thank yous as well. I also want to say thank you to the Pastega family for the support that they give to Western Oregon University in this award. And I feel really lucky that in my first few years at Western, I was able to meet both Alma and Mario Pastega. I want to say thank you to my division and to my dean. Mary, that was a very beautiful introduction, and I consider Mary to be one of my very first mentors here at Western, so that means a lot to me. And I think of my division as my Woo family, and thank you for all putting up with all of the messes that I make in the building, and I hope the books make it a little bit worth it. I want to say thank you to my family who are here. They also put up with a lot of book messes as well. I want to say thank you to my mom who's here, who never turned me in for having an alias at the library when I wasn't allowed to check out any more books because I hadn't returned the ones. Don't listen, Janine and Elizabeth. And I want to say thank you especially to my husband, who puts up with lots of shenanigans and probably hadn't anticipated many of the messes that I would make, but you make a lot of my ambitions possible, so thank you so much. So this quote here actually opened my dissertation 11, 12 years ago now, and I take it out again quite often because it's very powerful to me, and I think it really centers what my work is. So my work is about books, but it's also really about stories. And I think this quote is about the power of narrative, the power of stories that we read to each other, that we tell to each other, that we share with one another. And as a qualitative researcher, I'm particularly interested in story and voice-centered narrative, and so you'll hear a lot of voices, hopefully today, in the research that I share with you. And as a teacher-educator who specializes in literacy instruction, I'm especially interested in the stories of children and young adults and the teachers who work with them to help shape and inform their literate identities. So this week, several people did ask me what I was going to speak about, and then before I could tell them, they stopped and answered the question for themselves, and they said, oh, we know you're going to talk about books, right? Because I am, like the title of this lovely picture book, that book woman, okay? And Mary already gave me away, but I don't really believe it's hoarding if it's books. So yeah, this is just a little evidence that was just taken this week in my office that books really matter to me. When asked to describe my research agenda, I often think people aren't really sure what a children's literature specialist does. For the past 15 years, I've worked to really understand the body of literature that's available for children and young adults. And that does mean that I read a lot of books. I've worked on several state and national literature award committees, and I serve as an early reviewer for several children's publishers. And so, yes, I read a lot of books. I would say every year I probably read several hundred books that are published for children and young adults, although that is only a drop in the bucket as thousands of amazing books are published for young people every year. I critique and review many of these books and talk about the appeal that they might have for young readers, but really as a teacher researcher and as a teacher educator, the piece that's most interesting to me is where texts or books meet up with the reader. What Rosenblatt describes as the transaction between a reader and a text, and what that looks like in the imaginations of children and young adults and the teachers that work with them. So because of this, the majority of my research takes place in K-12 classroom spaces, investigating how texts impact children and young adults. And luckily, because I work at Western, every day I work with amazing pre-service and in-service teachers, and I've been lucky enough to research and co-research with many of our graduates, a few of whom are here today, which means a lot to me, and you'll actually get a little bit of a view into a couple of their classrooms. So I'm interested in stories, the physical books that we read with and to young readers, but also the stories of how children's imaginations and worldviews are shaped by words and images and conversations. My work, both my teaching and my research, is focused on honoring the voices of children and young adults and teachers in schools, voices that I don't really think we hear enough of. Words are sacred. They deserve respect. If you get the right ones in the right order, you can nudge the world a little. How and what creates that nudge can be different for all sorts of readers and for students and teachers. In my work, it almost always starts with text. That text might be words, that text might be images, but often it's a combination of both together. And I'd like to share a little bit with you today about the ways that children interact with text and make meaning from the world. So I'd like to first talk about pictures, which often sometimes we neglect to think about when we think about books. But pictures are very important in the work that I do because I work with very young readers as well as adolescent readers. So although in our classrooms we've moved away from Dick and Jane readers and the imperative to look, the truth is that look is often the first place I think of when I talk with children think about how we nudge their worlds. This is the natural first thing most children do. They look around them, they look at pictures, they investigate the world visually. Most of us can name a favorite picture book. Books that were read to us or we read to others. Maybe they were shared with us by a sibling or a parent, a teacher, or a librarian. We often think of picture books as for the very young, books that are for children until they are independent readers and they graduate to chapter books or novels. But this isn't true. The picture book is a format for storytelling, and this format offers a richness that not only appeals to, but informs readers no matter what their age. A picture book is generally a 32-page book, and what makes it unique is that both the images and the words matter equally for meaning making for the reader. A picture book is a specific format that has details that other books do not. It might have a dust jacket, a pictorial board, end pages, title pages, front matter, back matter, what we call paratext in the world of picture book analysis. And all of this really matters for children as they look at the world. As these elements of paratext are visually oriented, I often see adults skip right past them when they look at a book and they go right to where the narrative text begins. But children and students who take my children's literature courses know that that is not where we begin to look at a book. So just really quickly, this is Wolf in the Snow, authored and illustrated by Matthew Cordell, which was the 2018 Caldecott Award winner for illustration. And if we looked at this book and we skipped right to the title page, we would miss several things. And children know to look for these things. So if we took our dust jacket off, we would notice that there's actually a surprise for us that Matthew Cordell has designed. And we have these panels that add in new colors and illustrations that are going to give us a preview to predict what else might happen in the book. If we skip right to the title page, we will miss not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of illustrations that offer us important meaning making. So this is one of the things I'm very interested in, is looking at how children pick up picture books and notice all of these things visually. And this is the first way that they make meaning. This is often the first way that children accomplish deep analytical reading skills, how they learn to predict and synthesize and review and evaluate. And it's very important. So I encourage you the next time you read a book with someone to really think about visuals very deeply, because children do. I'm going to share a couple of examples from a classroom research study on illustration analysis and the power that it has for young children. Before I start, I want to share that this research is actually from Holly Sims' classroom, who's here today. She actually teaches with us now at Western, but I've worked with Holly for years. She is a former graduate student of mine, and she's one of the most amazing teachers I've ever known. And I worked in her classroom a lot, one, because she was always welcoming, but two, she was masterful at working with children on reading and conversation. And you'll see some of the things that the children in her classroom were able to do and discuss because of her masterful teaching and the fact that she really honored children's voices. So one year I was invited by Macmillan Publishing to present with Jason Chin, who is a Caldecott award-winning author illustrator. And Holly and I together investigated an author study with Jason Chin's work in her classroom. And over here on the side, you can see me reading aloud with her class, but we were really looking deeply at the images in Jason Chin's books. One of the things that's very specific to Jason Chin's work is that he writes nonfiction stories, but he accompanies the stories with very fantastical illustrations. So the fantasy element comes in the illustration. And so here there's a young boy, and he's picked up a book on the bus, and he's reading nonfiction text about the Jurassic period. But in the background of the subway, we can see the imagination that's going on in his head. And the children, of course, immediately know what is going on here, and they realize something that their teacher has already talked to them about, which is the fact that great readers make pictures in their head, and that Jason Chin is representing that. And so Lily here is really seeing how that is happening. So one of the things that I think is very interesting about working with illustrations with children is that they will always teach me something that I never saw in a book, no matter how many times I read it. So over here on the side, you have a very small illustration. This is a boy who's getting ready to climb a redwood tree because the book was entitled Redwoods. And we're having a conversation in the class about where we think Jason Chin got the information to write this nonfiction book. So the kids have wonderful ideas. They see things like maybe he went to the redwoods, maybe he lives nearby. And then a little boy named Noah, who's a second grader, says, I think that he read a book. And like most teachers do, I say, that is an amazing prediction. Can you tell me why you think that? And he says, well, go back 2 pages and look again at that illustration. And he points out to us that the protagonist here is reading a how-to book called How to Climb Trees. And he says, look, this character that he drew is reading a how-to book. I think Jason Chin put that in his illustration because he's read how-to books and he knows that's how you learn information. Something that I had not noticed until Noah pointed it out to me. So visual analysis is very important in the work that I do with picture books, but so is sociocultural analysis. And this is where the title of my presentation comes from, thinking about this metaphor of mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. In 1990, Rudine Sims Bishop wrote a very groundbreaking piece that is still referenced today, part of the reason why it's called Revisiting this Topic. And she talked about her metaphor for how children interact with books. And she said that books can be mirrors, or they can be windows, or they might be sliding glass doors. When we think about that and what that means, it might be that books are a window into a new experience or a new place or a new way of being for a reader. But also maybe they're a mirror. They let us see something that we connect to, something common, cultural, or by our own experiences, something that we recognize about ourselves in a book. Of course, the interesting thing is that the same book could be a mirror for one child and could be a window for another child. And we all need books that do both. We all need books that are both mirrors and windows for us. And, Bishop talked about how one of the things, and this was in 1990, she said, it's concerning, though, is that we don't have enough mirror books for children of color or children from other marginalized groups. That was in 1990. Still, 18 years later, that is true, and that's something that we need to think about is how do we provide enough books that children can see themselves in the books that they read. But I also think it's equally important to think about window books. What happens if children never read books that show them about different ways of being in the world? What happens then? How do we learn to grow to appreciate diversity or have empathy for others? Very important things to think about. Occasionally, I hear a story of a teacher or librarian or parent who feels the need to maybe protect children from window books that feature tough issues, painful topics such as abuse or poverty or other social issues. Matt de la Pena, an award-winning author who writes about issues related to race, biculturalism, immigration, all sorts of important issues, talks about how sometimes people want to shield children from his books. He relates an interesting story about going to a school library where a librarian told him how much she loved his books. However, she said, I want you to know that I really like your books. I mean, we don't have those kind of kids at our school, so we don't stock many of them. But I want you to know how much I appreciate your work. Matt's pretty smart. He thought about it for a second. He said, no, I totally get it, ma'am. Out of curiosity, though, how many wizards do you have at your school? Now, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, don't get me wrong, but I'm also a really big fan of children thinking about the world we live in and the needs that many people have, and for them building empathy from knowing the world and knowing that others live different lives than they do. Oftentimes, we have a tendency to maybe try to sugarcoat childhood, what it is to kids, and some people want to shield them from these windows. Every term in my children's literature class, we start with a classic and one of the most perfect stories ever written in my mind. Anyone know what book this is? Charlotte's Web. In many classrooms, this is the first chapter book that a teacher will read to their classroom. And probably many of you today remember having this tale read to you by a loved one or a teacher or a librarian. When we read this book together at the very beginning of our class, invariably one novice, soon-to-be teacher will say, okay, worry, spoiler alert if you haven't read Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's death is too much for children, and maybe we should save the book for, say, 5th or 6th grade or so. And again, they're new to working with children. So we have a lot of conversations. We talk about how Charlotte's Web teaches us many things, how it's a tale of friendship and risk and caring and life, and yes, of death. And we talk about how literature endures and how timeless and important the theme is of sacrifice and courage, and yes, of grief. We learn and talk together about how children learn to navigate such topics through safe spaces in classroom and often through characters and narrative. And then we move on to read contemporary picture books and middle grade novels that feature tough issues like immigration, addiction, homelessness, disability, and other issues that do affect children's lives. So back to Matt de la Pena. Recently, his picture book Love was critiqued by some reviewers for featuring this scene, which shows a child being comforted by his dog during a domestic dispute between his parents. Some felt this was too harsh for young readers. In an article entitled Why We Shouldn't Shield Children from Darkness, de la Pena describes how honoring diversity and acknowledging the truth of children's lives in picture books does matter, and how it provides both mirrors and windows for children. Those of us who've taught public school or who've worked with children know that many children and adolescents live incredibly hard lives. Their identities have already been shaped by abuse or neglect or trauma. Books are a safe space for children to navigate the tumultuous world that they and we live in. In fact, they're often safe spaces for us as well. So again, it is important for children to see mirrors and to know that they are not alone in their experiences. It's also important for children to see windows, to understand how others live, and to build empathy and resolve to work for a better world. So our children's literature course here at Western, that's an intro course, is actually entitled Children's Literature in Diverse Classrooms. We talk a lot about the diversity that our future teachers will see in the classrooms that they will inhabit and the children that they will teach. In working with pre-service teachers, I weave in many books that feature diverse content and feature diverse classrooms and students. One of the units that we look at is called Learning Differently, and we investigate books that feature issues related to learning disabilities. And students really start to reflect on what this might be. They get a window into their future classroom, and they start to think about providing both mirror and window books for the children that will be in their classrooms. It's my intent that future teachers will see the power of literature within their classroom to embrace difference and to consider both the mirrors and windows that books provide to children. Continually here at Western, I'm reminded of how important mirrors and windows are. I'm reminded of how important windows or mirrors are when an ed student tells me after reading I'll Give You the Sun, where were books like this when I was a teenager and navigating my own identity as a young gay man? As I read Noah's story, it was my story. As Mary mentioned, every Monday I co-teach a book club class at the Alternative High School in Corvallis. With an amazing language arts teacher who also, no surprise, is a WU grad. Together we read young adult novels, and many of them deal with tough topics: addiction, abuse, immigration, sexuality, power, culture, sense of self. The class has been wildly popular and very gratifying to teach and co-teach together. And we spend a lot of our time conferring with students and talking to them about their lives and the books that they would like to read and the windows and mirrors that they would like to see in those books. Sometimes this is still surprising to the kids, and many of them are reawakening after years of what I call being dormant readers. A few weeks ago, I got this email from my co-teacher, Anne, about a new student. I just recruited a new student for book club. She's a recovering non-reader. You know the type. I used to read a lot, like in 5th grade, but then I stopped. Today, she showed me her copy of Gabby, A Girl in Pieces. This is a book that we offer in book club. She said, I don't even know if this book is appropriate for school, but I love it. And it really reminds me of my own life. Anne writes, it's both funny and sad that a book that rings so true for her is also one that she assumes would not be allowed in school. Teachers can change these perceptions and can open up spaces for students to see themselves and the issues that matter to them in books. So I've talked a lot about fictional narratives up until this point, but one of my primary areas of expertise in children's literature is actually nonfiction literature for children, and I recently finished several chapters for a co-authored book on the place of nonfiction in the classroom to grow readers and writers. In times where we see the shrinking of the curriculum in imperative subjects such as science and social studies pushed to the margins in many elementary schools, books offer teachers powerful spaces to weave this content into the literacy curriculum. Children are intrinsically curious about the scientific and social world, and quality literature, especially nonfiction, provides spaces for inquiry. During the 3 years that I spent on the Orbis Pictus Committee for Nonfiction Literature, I was able to read a vast amount of nonfiction literature. A friend said to me when I started on the committee, you are going to be so smart by the time you finish that committee. And she was right. I learned a lot from these books, and children learn a lot from these books as well. One of the things that I think is so important about nonfiction literature and deep study of nonfiction in classrooms is that it offers students the opportunity to ask important questions and to learn ways to find the answers, which is very important for life. And in fact, one of my favorite aspects of studying nonfiction with children is investigating and examining the process by which authors create work, and then students using those nonfiction books as mentor texts to answer their own questions and create their own books as well. So these examples here are from Marianne Hill's classroom, who's also here, who's a former undergraduate and graduate student of Western. We grow amazing teachers here. Marianne is an amazing writing teacher and has allowed me to come in and co-teach with her for several years every spring on nonfiction writing, and we have learned a lot alongside of each other. It's been very powerful for ourselves as teachers, but also for the students to learn that there are spaces to find answers that matter to them. So you can see here one of her students who's done a lot of extensive note-taking through reading nonfiction, and then has created her own nonfiction book page where she's asked important questions that she wants to know and then discovered the answers and is now able to teach them to others. So through studying nonfiction, I believe that students see themselves as capable researchers and writers, but also possibly as scientists or historians, which I think is important to many of us as well. So I want to bring these threads back together now and talk a little bit about the rationale or the why this matters. Some might ask why spending time with children in schools and studying the ways that they and teachers interact with literature is so important. Others might actually think that children and teachers having conversations about text is so commonplace that it's not necessarily noteworthy. Although I've always been interested in books and conversation and literacy practices, I became firmly committed to this work when I was in my doctoral studies and I was teaching a graduate class in children's literature to practicing teachers. And I remember spending a day book talking so many amazing picture books and talking about ways to incorporate them into the classroom. And about a third of this class, they were all kindergarten teachers and they were practicing teachers right now. And two of them pulled me aside at the end of the class and were speaking for the group who all worked in the same district. And they said, this is really exciting, but we want you to know we won't be able to use any of these things in our classrooms. And at first, kind of like Peter's story, I thought, what is going on here? Okay, this is crazy. What is this resistance I'm seeing? And they let me know every moment of every day in our kindergarten class is scripted for us. And we don't have any time to read aloud to children in kindergarten. These teachers wanted examples, though. They wanted research. They wanted examples from classroom spaces so they could show administrators and legislators and policymakers that reading with children and having conversations is vitally important for children's development. And that is why this work matters so much to me. Limited views on what is literacy instruction and boiling literacy instruction down to packets and dittos and skills is troubling for teachers and for students and frankly for all of us. Picture books and children's literature may not seem like a political topic, but the children and teachers, like the ones that I worked with in Nevada, most likely to have limited curricular policies pushed down on them, as you can probably imagine, are children and teachers who live and work in socioeconomically disadvantaged schools, and often children for whom English is not their first language. So this work definitely is political and critically important. And I teach my students that curriculum is always political because it's always invested in some ideology about the world. So luckily, I believe that teachers want to push back. They want to have these spaces in their classroom. But I also know it's part of my job to equip future teachers with the knowledge and theory to know why reading and real books matter so much for young readers and young writers. So having spaces to work in classrooms matters so much because when you can bring those real conversations into your classes from your research, future teachers realize why they want to have spaces like that. I remember a student saying to me once, I want to learn how to get my students to talk like that. And that's what we want. So most of us know that Western grads go out and do amazing things. Luckily for me, they keep in touch and they let me know some of these things. They send me their reading spaces. They talk about the books that they're reading. They come back and ask for books. And like Mary said, it's not just our professors who get carts of books. Former students come back and get boxes of books as well to take out into their classrooms. So this is really important work. And it's very affirming to know that teachers are really valuing the place of books in children's hands. So many of you have probably read The Giver. I thought there was only us. I thought there was only now. This was the first children's book I was assigned when I went back to graduate school to become a reading specialist. And it was a powerful book then. It was written way before it was the dystopian rage in YA literature. But it's a book about how authorities have come in and they've taken everything painful out of society. Society can just be a little bit nicer. But of course, when we take everything else out, we also take out diversity, and we take out difference, and we take out passion, and we take out power. And Jonas, the protagonist in this book, eventually learns of a place called Elsewhere, and that there are worlds and people different than himself and his family. And that's the danger if we don't read, is that we often think there is only this. There is only now. There is only here. I want to finish by saying I think this work of putting books in children's hands and opening up spaces for children to think about the world is probably more important than it's ever been, definitely in my own career. On the morning after the last presidential election, I received over a dozen emails, texts, and Facebook messages from former students who are now teachers asking me how to talk with their students that day, how to calm their fears, what to read to them, what to say. I reminded these teachers that children already have the heroes they need in front of them, and I knew that they would find the right books and the right words to let their students know that they are loved and valued and powerful and capable and important. But I do know that in a world where, to some, science is suspect, where walls are more important than pathways, where secretaries of education are not worried about protecting our most vulnerable children, providing spaces to read widely and to think about diversity and about windows into other ways of being is more important than it's ever been. Access to books for all children matters. Preparing teachers who understand this is vital. How do we bring books that matter into children's hands? We tell the stories that otherwise don't get told. We piece together the stories that some might hide from children. We remember that words can still nudge the world, and sometimes more than a little bit. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and it's so good to have a beautiful spring day to enjoy this celebration. I want to thank both Peter and Marie for thought-provoking presentations related to the work that we do here at Western. I'm so glad to see family members here enjoying the day as well. It's wonderful that that's part of our community going forward, as well as some of our alums who are now out in the field teaching. It's so good that we have some of you here to enjoy the work of our faculty. You know, this program is long-lasting, as Dr. Scheck mentioned, for many, many decades. And it really honors the work that we do here at Western around academic excellence. The core of academic excellence, I think, is the scholarly and creative work that Marie talked about. It's also the way in which we can weave that together to challenge our students to learn in a very active and proactive way, as Peter described. It's that intersection of the work we do that builds the body of knowledge and discovery that drives the university forward over these centuries. And I know that all of us here are lucky to have a chance to work in such an environment because we care deeply about the role it has in society. Without education, without learning, without universities, we would be at peril for many, many things. And I think Western stands as really a tribute to the work that we have come before us. As an example of that, I'm looking around the room and also looking at the program, and there are scores of previous award winners in the room as well. Previous Pastega Award winners for both teaching and for scholarly activities. If you're inclined, would you wave your hand to give you a sense of how many of those award winners are joining us today? It's scores of them. And so I want to thank the work you've done. And while Peter gave us a warning about these kinds of events as separating us, I think in this particular case, it draws us together. It draws us to the passion that we have at Western for academic excellence, the passion we have for our students and the next generations that we will educate and graduate, and the work that they will do in the many, many different walks that they choose to pursue. And that's what really drives a university experience. When I think about what attracts us to this opportunity, I think about at our core, every faculty member I've talked to over the years I've been in higher education, when you talk about what really drew you and what keeps you, what motivates you, what takes you from the bad days to the good days and beyond, it's that impact we have on other people, and oftentimes the notion of making a positive difference in a walk of a student, many of whom, in our case, are the first in their families to go to college and graduate. And how powerful is that in today's world? And we just know the power of the educated mind, the committed citizen, and the impact that higher education has in a civil society. I stand with you as honoring that work today, and I hope that you appreciate the work of our two honorees for teaching excellence and for scholarly and creative activities. Make sure that you talk to our honorees and thank them for the work they do and the example that they give us as colleagues. So thank you.